The vastness of Nexus Point spread out before Kale as he stepped through the final decontamination chamber. Its central atrium soared hundreds of meters overhead, a cathedral to interstellar cooperation built from materials that seemed to defy physics itself. Light danced across surfaces that rippled like water, yet stood solid as stone. But it wasn't the architecture that made Kale's breath catch in his throat. It was the beings that filled it. Creatures of every imaginable form moved through the space with purpose. Massive, four-legged entities with translucent skin revealing complex circulatory systems glided past crystalline beings that hovered several feet above the ground. Tentacled diplomats engaged in animated conversations with what appeared to be sentient gas clouds contained in elaborate mechanical suits. And everywhere, technology beyond human comprehension hummed and pulsed, interfaces adapting instantly to whatever appendage or sensory organ approached them. Kale had spent years preparing for this moment. As Earth's first representative to the intergalactic diplomatic hub, the culmination of humanity's tentative steps into faster-than-light travel and subsequent discovery of the vast community of spacefaring civilizations, he carried the weight of an entire planet on his shoulders. Linguistics specialist, xenobiologist, amateur diplomat by necessity. All his training seemed suddenly insufficient as he stood there, conspicuously small and conspicuously human. "Welcome to Nexus Point, Ambassador Kale," came a voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am Nexus Mind, the station's administrative intelligence. Your quarters have been prepared according to Earth specifications. May I assist with orientation?" Kale cleared his throat, aware that dozens of alien eyes, or sensory organs that serve similar functions, had turned toward him. "Thank you, Nexus Mind. I would appreciate a brief introduction to the common areas first, if possible." "Certainly," the AI responded with a tone that somehow conveyed both efficiency and warmth. "The central atrium where you now stand serves as the primary transit hub and informal gathering space. The diplomatic chambers are located on levels 60 through 90. Research facilities occupy levels 91 through 120. Your species has been allocated Chamber 42 in the Emerging Civilizations sector on level 65. Emerging civilizations, Kale repeated softly. Of course, humans were barely toddlers in cosmic terms, having achieved faster-than-light travel less than a century ago. As the AI continued its orientation, Kale became increasingly aware of a presence focused intently upon him. Turning slowly, he found himself being watched by one of the most intimidating beings he had yet seen. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall on powerful digitigrade legs, its body covered in overlapping plates that resembled obsidian armor. A ridge of what appeared to be crystalline spines ran from the crown of its head down its back, occasionally emitting faint pulses of reddish light. But most striking were its eyes, vertical slits of burning amber set in a face that seemed sculpted specifically to evoke primal fear. That is Ambassador Forlag of the Cthar Dominion, Nexus Mind supplied helpfully. Cthar are classified as apex predators in their evolutionary history and maintain a considerable military presence in the galactic northwest quadrant. Kale managed a respectful nod toward the imposing figure. The Cthar's head tilted slightly, the motion reminiscent of a predator calculating a leap, but made no other acknowledgement. Something in that gaze, however, went beyond the dismissive glances Kale had received from other aliens. There was attention, interest perhaps, or assessment. "Ambassador Kale," a melodious voice broke his concentration. "How wonderful to finally meet Earth's representative." A being composed of what appeared to be intricately patterned living wood and luminescent vines approached. Blossoms periodically opened and closed along its form, releasing faint mists of glowing pollen. "This is Representative Lyra of the Xylosian Collective," Nexus Mind introduced. "The pleasure is mine," Kale responded, grateful for the friendly approach. "I've studied what little information we had about Xylosian communication patterns. Your symbiotic relationship with pollinator species has created fascinating linguistic structures. Lyra's form rippled in what Kale hoped was pleasure. How observant! Most new species require much longer to notice the subtleties of our expressions. Perhaps humans possess greater perceptive abilities than your physical form suggests. The diplomatic implications of the statement weren't lost on Kale. Size mattered in space, it seemed, and humans were decidedly on the smaller end of the galactic spectrum. Even Lyra, among the more moderately sized beings, towered a full meter above him. We try to compensate for our physical limitations with attention to detail, Kale replied diplomatically. A charming sentiment. Came a new voice, deep and resonant with undercurrents of disdain. Though perhaps better suited to servant species than those aspiring to meaningful participation in galactic affairs. The speaker was a massive, reptilian entity with iridescent scales and multiple sets of arms. Elaborate insignia adorned what appeared to be ceremonial armor. Ambassador Grand of the Saurian hegemony. Nexus Mind identified. Ambassador Grand chairs the Security Council's Non-Proliferation Committee. Ambassador Kale. Grand acknowledged with the barest incline of his crested head. I trust Earth's delegation understands that technological advancement alone does not grant equal standing among established civilizations. There is a natural order to things. Before Kale could formulate a response that wouldn't jeopardize humanity's standing on his first day, alarms began blaring throughout the atrium. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing distortion patterns across communication networks. Attention, Nexus Mind announced, its harmonious voice now sharp with urgency. A system-wide translation anomaly has been detected. All diplomatic functions are temporarily suspended. Please remain calm as we isolate the source. Chaos erupted as various species reacted according to their temperaments. Some immediately formed defensive postures. Others began rapid-fire communications in their native languages. Kale noticed the Cthar, Forelag, had not moved, but instead watched the pandemonium with calculating eyes. On the main display, two delegations, one composed of crystalline entities, the other seeming to be some sort of energy beings contained in mechanical shells, were facing off in what appeared to be pre-combat stances. Translation error, Nexus Mind clarified. The chrysalid greeting, we extend peaceful harmonics, has been mistranslated to the Virati as, we have targeted your frequencies. Attempting to resolve, Kale studied the exchange patterns on a nearby data terminal. The translation matrix was struggling with the fundamental differences between crystalline vibration language and energy state communication. But there was something familiar about the pattern distortion. Nexus Mind, he called out, the error isn't in the semantic layer. It's a harmonic resonance problem. The chrysalid communication frequency is creating an unintentional interference pattern with Virati perception fields. Without waiting for permission, Kale accessed the terminal, applying a modified version of an algorithm he developed on Earth for cross-referencing ancient phonetic systems. If you shift the chrysalid output by approximately 0.3 terahertz and apply this dampening pattern, it should. The tension between the delegations visibly dissipated as the translation corrected itself. Conversations throughout the atrium gradually resumed. Analysis confirmed, Nexus Mind announced. Translation matrix updated with harmonic interference compensation. Crisis averted. Lyra's blossoms open wide. Remarkable problem solving, Ambassador Kale. You identified and corrected an error that has been causing minor diplomatic incidents for nearly a full stellar cycle. Even Ambassador Grand looked momentarily discomfited by Kale's quick solution, his multiple arms shifting in what might have been irritation. A fortunate coincidence that the human recognized a pattern similar to their primitive communication systems, he finally said, hardly indicative of advanced capabilities. As the gathered diplomats dispersed, Kale became aware again of the Cthar's burning gaze. Forelag had watched the entire exchange without movement. Now, those amber eyes narrowed slightly before the imposing figure turned and stalked away, crystalline spines pulsing once with ruby light. Kale couldn't shake the feeling that he had just passed some sort of test, or perhaps simply postponed a failure. Either way, humanity's first day at Nexus Point had certainly made an impression. He only hoped it would be enough to secure their place among the stars. That night, in his assigned quarters, surprisingly comfortable despite being designed based on limited understanding of human needs, Kale reviewed the day's events and prepared for his first formal diplomatic session the following cycle. His thoughts kept returning to the Cathar ambassador's enigmatic attention. According to the brief files available to him, the Cathar were notoriously private, martially superior, and seldom formed alliances except from positions of absolute dominance. Why would such a being take any notice of Earth's representative? His contemplation was interrupted by Nexus Mind. Ambassador Kale, you have received a priority alert. An unusual signal has been detected by Nexus Point's long-range sensors. All scientific advisors and representatives have been requested to attend an emergency briefing in Observatory Hall 3 in 1 standard hour. Kale arrived at the observatory to find it already crowded with representatives from dozens of species. Massive view screens displayed what appear to be wave patterns, complex, shifting, and utterly unlike any natural phenomenon Kale had studied. The signal was first detected approximately 7 standard hours ago. A being Kale recognized as the chief science officer, a multi-brained entity from a gas giant species, was explaining. It appears to be directed specifically at Nexus Point, though its origin point is difficult to triangulate due to unusual quantum characteristics. Is it a weapon? Ambassador Grond demanded, his scales flushing a deeper hue. The pattern contains regularities consistent with artificial generation. Unknown, the science officer replied. We have attempted standard decryption and communication protocols with no success. Then we must assume hostile intent, Grond pressed. I propose immediate defensive measures and the dispatch of a military reconnaissance fleet. Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the gathered representatives. Kale noticed Forlag standing at the periphery, silent and watchful as before. If I may, Kale spoke up, surprising himself with his boldness. The pattern exhibits characteristics that might be interpreted as linguistic rather than technological in nature. There are repeating elements that suggest a communication attempt rather than a weapon signature. All eyes turned to him. The smallest being in the room had spoken, and many seemed astonished that he had dared to contradict Ambassador Grond. Linguistic? Grond's voice dripped with scorn. And what expertise could Earth possibly offer on matters beyond your comprehension? The signal contains energy fluctuations that would require technology centuries beyond your capability to even detect, let alone interpret. That may be true, Kale acknowledged, but linguistic patterns often transcend technological limitations. If we approach this as a potential communication rather than a threat, we might. Enough! Grond cut him off. The security of Nexus Point cannot be gambled on the naive optimism of an improving species. I move for immediate defensive protocols and signal disruption measures. Voices rose as various factions began arguing. Through the clamor, Kale noticed Forlag finally moving, approaching one of the sensor displays with deliberate steps. The Cathar studied the pattern, then, to Kale's astonishment, turned those burning eyes directly to him and spoke for the first time in a voice like grinding stone. The human should be given access to the raw signal data. The room fell silent. The Cathar rarely intervened in scientific matters and never on behalf of lesser species. Ambassador Forlag, Grond sputtered, surely you cannot suggest. The pattern, Forlag continued as if Grond hadn't spoken, resonates with ancient warnings known to my kind. If it is what I suspect destruction would be, unwise. The science officer hesitated only briefly before authorizing Kale's access. Very well. Ambassador Kale will be granted temporary clearance to the Signal Analysis Laboratory. Ambassador Forlag, would you care to observe? Forlag inclined his head in silent assent. Hours later, Kale sat surrounded by holographic projections of the signal, parsed into various analytical formats. Despite the advanced technology at his disposal, understanding remained elusive. The patterns seemed almost familiar at moments, then would shift into utter alienness. He became aware of Forlag's continued presence, the Cthar having remained utterly still for the past 3 hours, observing. "You see something in these patterns," Kale said, not a question, but an observation. "Something from Cthar history?" For a long moment, he thought Forlag would not answer. Then, the massive being approached the central display. 10,000 cycles ago, Forlag began, his voice like distant thunder. "When the Cthar first ventured between stars, we encountered patterns similar to these. They emanated from a region of space where stars died before their time." He reached out one clawed hand, manipulating the display to isolate a particular sequence. "Our ancestors called them soul eaters, beings of vast intelligence that existed between the stars themselves. Not predators as we understood them, but entities so alien that their very passage through a system would disrupt the fundamental forces binding matter together." "You think this signal comes from such a being?" Kale asked, fascinated despite the ominous implications. "Perhaps. Or perhaps something that survived their passing." Forlag's gaze fixed on Kale with unsettling intensity. "My ancestors did not defeat them with weapons." The implication hung in the air between them. Kale returned to the signal with renewed focus, now looking for patterns that might suggest communication from a truly alien consciousness rather than anything resembling known languages. Days passed in a blur of intensive analysis. Kale slept little, driven by both the urgency of the situation and an increasing certainty that the signal contained something vital. Lyra joined his efforts, contributing Xylosian understanding of nonverbal communication forms. Forlag continued his silent vigil, occasionally offering cryptic insights from Cthar historical records. Meanwhile, Ambassador Grand grew increasingly impatient, rallying support for a military response among the more cautious species. The signal had begun affecting certain sensitive equipment throughout Nexus Point, fueling fears of a technological attack or infiltration. On the 5th day, exhausted and frustrated, Kale sat alone in the laboratory during the station's designated night cycle. The patterns swirled before him, tantalizingly familiar, yet incomprehensible. "You should rest," came Forlag's voice from the shadows. The Cthar had departed hours ago, but had apparently returned unnoticed. "I'm close to something," Kale insisted. "There's a resonance here that reminds me of something from Earth's biological communication systems. Not language exactly, but the speech of non-sentient creatures," Forlag suggested. "No, more fundamental. Like," Kale's eyes widened, "like cellular communication. The chemical signaling between living cells." He began rapidly reconfiguring the analysis parameters, translating the signal into biochemical equivalent patterns rather than linguistic or mathematical ones. "Nexus Mind, can you simulate these patterns as biochemical receptor responses rather than data sequences?" The display transformed, showing cascading reactions that would occur if the signal were received not by technology, but by living tissue. "It's beautiful," Kale whispered. Before them unfolded a perfect model of energy transfer and information exchange, reminiscent of the most efficient biological systems, but on a scale and complexity beyond anything in known science. "It's alive," Kale realized. "The signal isn't coming from a ship or a weapon. It's coming from a living entity, one that communicates through direct energy-to-biochemical conversion. I think it's trying to heal something." Forlag studied the display, crystalline spines glowing more intensely. "Yes, this is similar to records of how the ancient ones communicated before destruction was attempted. We need to present this to the Council immediately," Kale said, already compiling his findings. "If Grand convinces them to launch an attack, it will be perceived as aggression," Forlag finished, "and the response would be unfortunate." The emergency council session the following day was tense. Grand had already convinced many representatives that the signal's increasing interference with station systems constituted a clear attack. "The disruptions have escalated to critical systems," he argued. 3 more cycles of this, and life support capabilities may be compromised. We must act decisively. Kale stood, conscious of how small he appeared before the gathered ambassadors. Honorable representatives, I believe we've misunderstood the nature of the signal. It's not a weapon or an attack. It's a living entity attempting communication through direct energy-to-cellular interfacing. He presented his findings, explaining how the patterns replicated biological information exchange at a quantum level. The interference with our systems is incidental, like how a powerful electromagnetic field might disrupt primitive electronics without malicious intent. It doesn't understand that its attempts to communicate are harmful to our technology. Skeptical murmurs filled the chamber. Grand's scales flushed with color patterns that Kale had learned indicated contempt. Fascinating theory, Ambassador, Grand said. But even if true, the result remains the same. This entity threatens Nexus Point. Whether through malice or mere incompatibility, the danger must be eliminated. There is precedent, Kale countered. Ambassador Forlag has confirmed that the Cthar encountered similar entities millennia ago. All eyes turned to Forlag, who had remained at the periphery until now. The massive Predator stepped forward, spines glowing faintly. What the human says aligns with our ancestral records, he stated flatly. The entities we encountered responded to aggression with devastating consequences. Many worlds were lost before understanding was achieved. And what understanding was that? The science officer inquired. That they existed both within and beyond our perception of reality. That their communications were attempts to harmonize their existence with ours. When we ceased attacking and instead attempted to respond in kind, using biochemical signals amplified to quantum scales, coexistence became possible. Grand huffed. Dismissively, ancient myths are hardly the basis for strategic decisions in the face of an imminent threat. The Cthar records speak of events 10,000 cycles past, filtered through primitive understanding. Then let us test the theory, Kale suggested. Allow me to attempt communication using the protocols I've developed based on the signal's patterns. If it truly is a living entity seeking contact, it may respond differently to a signal that matches its own communication method. After hours of heated debate, the council narrowly approved Kale's proposal. With significant safety protocols in place and a fleet of defensive vessels on standby should the attempt go wrong. In the Central Observatory, Kale worked feverishly with Lyra and a team of xenobiologists to configure Nexus Point's communication array to generate the unique quantum biochemical patterns they had identified. Forlag observed silently, occasionally offering adjustments based on historical records. The configuration is ready, Kale announced finally. The response signal mimics the entity's patterns but incorporates elements of simplified biochemical greeting signals found across multiple species. A universal hello in quantum cellular language, essentially. Grand, who had insisted on overseeing the procedure personally, checked the defensive systems one final time. Proceed, then. But at the first sign of increased aggression, I will order immediate countermeasures. Kale initiated the transmission. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The original signal continued unchanged. Then abruptly it ceased entirely. Has it withdrawn? The science officer asked anxiously. Or is it preparing an attack? Grand suggested, his hand hovering over the defense controls. Wait, Kale urged, studying the readings. Something's happening. A new pattern emerged, similar to the original but fundamentally altered. Where the first signal had been complex but chaotic, this one contained clear, organized structures that pulsed in rhythm with their transmitted greeting. It's responding, Kale breathed. It's matched our communication protocol and is adapting to it. This is dialogue. Over the next several hours, the exchange continued, growing increasingly complex. Kale worked with Nexus Mind to develop interpretive algorithms, gradually extracting meaning from the quantum patterns. It calls itself. The closest translation would be Stellar Weaver, Kale reported to the fascinated council. It's an ancient entity that exists partially in our dimension and partially in several others. It perceives reality as energy patterns and matter as temporary manifestations of those patterns. What does it want? Grand demanded, still suspicious. It's trying to warn us, Kale said, his voice hushed with awe. There's a distortion, a tear in space-time approaching this sector. Something it calls the unraveling. It's trying to teach us how to strengthen the fabric of local space to withstand the coming disruption. And we interpreted its warning as an attack. Lyra's blossoms drooped in apparent dismay. As the communication progressed, the Stellar Weaver began transmitting complex information, patterns that, when properly interpreted, contained instructions for modifying Nexus Point's shield generators to create a specialized field that would reinforce local spacetime. A crisis had been averted, but greater challenges lay ahead. The Stellar Weaver's warning of the unraveling suggested cosmic dangers beyond anything the assembled species had prepared for. To Kale's surprise, he found himself at the center of a newly formed research initiative dedicated to understanding and addressing this threat. Even more surprising was Forlag's continued presence. The Cthar had taken to following Kale to various meetings and work sessions, still mostly silent, but increasingly participatory when ancient knowledge or strategic assessment was needed. After one particularly long session analyzing the latest data from the Stellar Weaver, Kale found himself alone with Forlag in an observation lounge overlooking the vast star field beyond Nexus Point. I've been meaning to ask, Kale ventured, why did you support my interpretation of the signal? Before there was any evidence, you advocated for giving me access. Forlag was silent for so long that Kale thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his rumbling voice was contemplative. Cthar are predators. We assess threats differently than prey species. And humans are prey in your assessment? Kale asked, unsure whether to be offended. All species are prey to something, Forlag replied. But some understand predators better than others. When most saw the signal as a threat, you saw it as communication. When Gron saw only danger to destroy, you sought understanding. These are traits Cthar value, though few outside our kind know this. He turned those burning eyes to Kale. My ancestors learned, at great cost, that the mightiest hunter can become prey when facing forces beyond conventional understanding. Sometimes survival depends not on strength, but on recognition, seeing beyond the obvious to identify the true nature of what one faces. And you think humans possess this trait? You did, Forlag said simply, when others did not. It was the closest thing to a compliment Kale had received from the intimidating being, and he found himself oddly touched by it. The following weeks saw an intensification of both the research efforts and the political tensions surrounding them. Ambassador Grand, though temporarily silenced by the successful communication with the Stellar Weaver, had begun questioning the value of investing so heavily in defenses against an unproven cosmic threat. He advocated instead for military preparation against more conventional dangers, implying that the entire situation might be an elaborate deception. Kale's team, meanwhile, made significant progress in understanding the Stellar Weaver's warnings. The entity described the unraveling as a fundamental breakdown in the quantum fabric of spacetime caused by the collapse of a neighboring dimensional plane. The effect would propagate through this sector of the galaxy within a stellar year, causing catastrophic failure of natural laws unless countermeasures were implemented. The technical challenges were immense. While the Stellar Weaver could perceive and manipulate quantum states directly, the species of Nexus Point required technological intermediaries to achieve similar effects. Each new insight brought fresh engineering challenges that pushed the boundaries of even the most advanced civilization's capabilities. During this period, Kale noticed a subtle shift in Forlag's behavior. The Cthar began actively contributing to technical discussions, drawing on historical records of his species' encounters with dimensional anomalies. More significantly, he had begun to position himself physically near Kale during potential confrontations with Grand or other skeptical ambassadors, a clear signal of alliance that was not lost on the diplomatic community. The first true test of their work came unexpectedly. A minor spatial distortion, apparently a precursor to the main event, passed through a nearby uninhabited system. Sensors recorded the brief but terrifying suspension of normal physical laws. Gravity reversed, atomic bonds weakened, and light itself behaved according to alien rules for approximately 7 minutes before normalcy returned. The recorded data silenced many skeptics and lent new urgency to the project. Resources and expertise flooded in from species that had previously held back. Even Grand was forced to acknowledge the reality of the threat, though he continued to question the wisdom of following the Stellar Weaver's guidance so trustingly. Late one night, as Kale pored over simulation data showing the projected effects of their prototype shield modifications, an alarm blared throughout the station. Nexus Mind reported a security breach in the central data core. Someone was attempting to override the control protocols for the modified shield generators. Kale rushed to the control center to find chaos. Security forces of various species were converging on the data core, but the sabotage was already underway. The shield modifications were being systematically corrupted in a way that would not only render them ineffective against the unraveling, but might actually amplify its effects. Rather than asked, "Yes, but it's necessary." Forlag was silent for a moment, then extended one clawed hand. In it lay a small, crystalline object similar to the spines along his back. "Take this. If threatened directly, break it. It will release an energy pulse that disorients most species' neural systems." Kale accepted the unexpected gift. "Thank you." Forlag's eyes narrowed. "Do not die, little brother. It would be inconvenient for the project." Before Kale could react to the surprising form of address, Forlag had turned away, gathering the security forces for the frontal assault. The maintenance conduit was even more confining than Kale had anticipated, barely large enough for him to crawl through on hands and knees. Nexus Mind guided him through a labyrinth of narrow passages, the sounds of combat from Forlag's diversion echoing distantly through the station structure. Finally, he emerged into the data core's central chamber. 3 Saurians were working frantically at a control interface, finalizing their sabotage. They had not noticed his entrance through the small access panel near the floor. Kale approached quietly, Forlag's crystal clutched in his hand. He needed to reach the main control panel to halt the override process. The Saurians, focused on their task and confident in their security measures, remained unaware of his presence until he was nearly at the console. When one finally spotted him, their reaction was immediate and violent. A weapon was drawn, energy gathering at its tip. Kale crushed the crystal in his hand. The effect was instantaneous. A pulse of crimson energy expanded outward, and the Saurians dropped to their knees, disoriented and incapacitated. Kale rushed to the controls, frantically working to undo the sabotage. He had almost succeeded when the lead Saurian, recovering faster than expected, lunged toward him with a roar of rage. The blow never landed. The wall beside them exploded inward, and Forlag burst through the opening, moving with shocking speed for his size. The Cthar intercepted the Saurian mid-attack, hurling the saboteur across the room with terrifying force. "Continue your work, little brother," Forlag commanded, positioning himself between Kale and the remaining threats. "I will ensure you are not interrupted further." With Forlag standing guard, Kale completed the system restoration. Security forces soon secured the area, and the saboteurs were taken into custody. Investigation revealed Grand's direct involvement in ordering the sabotage, a desperate attempt to discredit the Stellar Weaver's guidance and reassert his vision for Nexus Point's future. In the aftermath, Grand was recalled by his government, his reputation shattered. The project to prepare for the unraveling gained even greater support across species, now vindicated by the attempted sabotage. As for Kale and Forlag, their unlikely alliance had transformed into something neither had anticipated. The term little brother was no longer used solely in private, but had become Forlag's standard address for Kale, even in formal settings. When asked about it by a curious Lyra, Forlag had simply stated, "In Cthar tradition, a little brother is not merely a younger sibling. It is one who sees what others cannot, who follows different paths, but whose vision proves true. One who is protected not out of obligation, but because their survival ensures the pack's wisdom remains balanced." The revelation of this cultural context sent ripples through Nexus Point's diplomatic community. That the fearsome Forlag, representative of the notoriously solitary Cthar, would publicly claim such a relationship with Earth's representative signaled a seismic shift in interspecies dynamics. In the months that followed, work proceeded rapidly on implementing the Stellar Weaver's protective measures. Kale's linguistic and biological insights, combined with Forlag's strategic and historical knowledge, formed the core of a multidisciplinary approach that united the diverse species of Nexus Point in ways previously unimaginable. The Stellar Weaver continued its communications, now sharing not only technical information about the unraveling, but also profound insights into the nature of consciousness and reality. These revelations suggested a deeper connection between all life forms, a fundamental resonance at the quantum level that transcended physical differences. It speaks of a shared spark, Kale explained to the Council during one briefing. A quantum pattern that appears in all conscious entities regardless of their biological or non-biological nature. This pattern is apparently what allowed it to recognize our potential for communication despite our vastly different forms of existence. And this spark is what will be threatened by the unraveling? Asked the science officer. Precisely, Kale confirmed. The unraveling doesn't just affect physical laws. It disrupts the quantum coherence that allows consciousness to maintain stable patterns. The shield technology we're developing protects not just matter, but mind. As the day of the unraveling's arrival approached, tension mounted throughout Nexus Point. The modified shields were in place, but their effectiveness against such an unprecedented phenomenon remained theoretical. Many species sent their non-essential personnel away from the station as a precaution. Kale and Forlag, however, remained at the center of operations, fine-tuning the shield configurations based on the Stellar Weaver's increasingly detailed instructions. If the shields fail, Lyra asked them privately, what happens? Then we witness the impossible, Forlag replied with unexpected philosophical calm, and perhaps become something new in the process. You're not afraid? Kale asked his towering companion. Forlag's amber eyes fixed on him. Fear is appropriate in the face of genuine threat. But this is beyond fear or courage. It simply is. Besides, he added, crystalline spines glowing faintly. My ancestors faced the Soul Eaters and survived. We will face this unraveling and do the same. The confidence in Forlag's voice bolstered not just Kale, but all who heard it. The Cthar's evolution as an apex predator had given his species an unusual relationship with existential threats. They neither minimized dangers nor succumbed to panic, but instead maintained a clear-eyed assessment of survival necessities. When the unraveling finally arrived, it came not as a dramatic wave or sudden catastrophe, but as a subtle shifting of reality itself. Instruments began recording impossible readings. Light bent in ways that violated known physics. Gravity fluctuated in patterns that matched the Stellar Weaver's predicted signatures. The shields activated automatically, creating a bubble of stabilized space-time around Nexus Point. Within this protection, normal laws of physics prevailed, but the view screen showing the space beyond displayed a reality gone fluid and strange. Stars smearing across the void, energy and matter interchanging, dimensions folding and unfolding in breathtaking, terrifying patterns. In the control center, Kale monitored the shield parameters while Forlag coordinated with security teams to maintain calm throughout the station. For 7 hours, the unraveling passed through their sector of space, testing the limits of the protective technology. When it finally reseated, leaving normal space-time in its wake, a collective exhalation seemed to pass through Nexus Point. They had survived. More than that, they had gathered invaluable data about a cosmic phenomenon previously unknown to any of their civilizations. The Stellar Weaver sent one final communication before departing for distant regions of space. A complex quantum pattern that, when interpreted, contained information about similar phenomena occurring in other sectors of the galaxy and ways to predict their movements. A gift of knowledge, freely given in exchange for the cooperation it had received. In the aftermath, Nexus Point was transformed. New research initiatives sprang up to study the implications of the unraveling and the quantum nature of consciousness revealed by the Stellar Weaver. The diplomatic structure itself evolved, with greater emphasis on cooperative problem-solving and less on traditional power hierarchies. Earth, represented by Kale, found itself elevated from emerging civilization status to a recognized contributor to galactic science and diplomacy. The unique human perspective, simultaneously fragile and resilient, limited in physical capacity but adaptable in thought, had proven unexpectedly valuable in facing challenges that transcended conventional approaches. Most remarkable to observers was the continued alliance between Kale and Forlag. The human and the Cthar, physically as different as two sentient species could be, had formed a partnership that combined complementary strengths. Forlag's evolutionary perspective as an apex predator, with its instinctive recognition of systemic threats and protective responses, meshed seamlessly with Kale's analytical methods and empathic insights. 6 cycles after the unraveling, Kale stood in the newly constructed Stellar Phenomena Observatory that had been built to continue the research they had begun. Through its vast viewing portal, the gathered dignitaries could observe a distant spatial anomaly similar to but smaller than the unraveling, a perfect research opportunity without immediate threat. The preliminary data suggests at least 3-dimensional crossover points. Kale was explaining to a group that included representatives from 17 species previously uninvolved with Nexus Point. Earth's successful handling of the crisis had drawn interest from across the galaxy. Forlag stood nearby, his imposing presence now a familiar and reassuring sight in diplomatic gatherings. When a representative from a particularly militant species questioned the value of studying phenomena that might never directly affect their territory, it was Forlag who responded. "The greatest predator is not the one with the sharpest claws," he stated, crystalline spines glowing with measured intensity, "but the one who recognizes threats before they manifest fully." My little brother understood this when beings far older and physically stronger did not. It is why Cthar now formally ally ourselves with Earth in these matters. The announcement sent a ripple of surprise through the gathering. Cthar formal alliances were exceedingly rare and carried significant weight in galactic politics. Later, when the dignitaries had departed and only Kale and Forlag remained in the observatory, Kale finally asked the question that had lingered since that first crisis. "Why did you start calling me little brother?" The truth. Forlag was silent for a long moment, amber eyes fixed on the distant anomaly visible through the viewing portal. 10,000 cycles ago, he finally began. When my ancestors faced the Soul Eaters, our greatest hunters and warriors failed. Our weapons and strength meant nothing against such entities. But there was among us one who was different, smaller, more given to observation than combat. It was this one who first recognized the Soul Eaters not as enemies, but as beings so alien that destruction was neither possible nor necessary, merely understanding. He turned to Kale. This one was called Vorkarel, one who sees beyond in your tongue. He was not of the dominant bloodline, yet his insights saved our species and established the foundation of what would become Cthar philosophy. That true strength lies in recognizing the nature of what one faces, not merely in the ability to destroy it. And this Vorkarel, Kale prompted, sensing there was more to the story, was born of a different mother than the dominant warriors. A smaller, gentler female who had mated with the pack leader. He was, literally, the little brother to the great warriors, yet it was his vision that proved essential for survival. Forlag's spines pulsed with ruby light. In Cthar tradition since that time, to call someone little brother is to acknowledge them as Vorkarel's spiritual descendant, one who sees what warriors cannot. Kale was momentarily speechless at the depth of meaning behind what he had assumed was a merely affectionate or possibly condescending nickname. I'm honored, he finally managed. "As you should be," Forlag replied with characteristic directness. "It is not a title given lightly. Only 3 non-Cathar have received it in our recorded history." He gestured toward the spatial anomaly visible through the viewport. The galaxy changes, little brother. Old strengths become weaknesses. New insights become essential. The Cthar evolved as apex predators, but we survived as something more. Perhaps humans will follow a similar path. As they stood together watching the dance of dimensions across the void, Kale reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He had arrived at Nexus Point as Earth's representative, conscious of humanity's smallness in the cosmic order. Now he understood that physical stature and technological advancement were merely one measure of a species' value. In a universe where reality itself could unravel, perhaps the greatest strength lay in the ability to adapt, to see beyond conventional perspectives, and to forge connections across the widest of divides. Beside him, Forlag, the apex predator who had become both protector and ally, stood in comfortable silence, their unlikely brotherhood a testament to possibilities neither of their species had imagined before their paths crossed at Nexus Point. And somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars, the stellar weaver continued its ancient journey, perhaps contemplating the curious beings it had encountered, beings of such different form and thought, yet united by that shared spark of consciousness that transcended all physical divisions. The smallest species in the room had indeed proven to be more than it appeared, and the apex predator, in calling him little brother, had recognized a truth older than either of their civilizations. That true wisdom often comes in unexpected packages, and that survival itself sometimes depends on seeing value where others see only weakness.